Hey, we just bought 10 kilos of meat for the equivalent of $3.74. So we're living in a world where we waste so much, and here on this table there's basically those pieces of meat, pork to be specific, that we waste all the time. You have the pigtails, you have the pig feet, you have the fat that always disappears and becomes sausage or something like that. You have the pork neck, which is a fatty piece of meat but still decent amount of meat, ribs, and then just ribs carcass. You don't have the beautiful long ribs that people like. It's just the rest and the spine. I took some inspiration from the way my grandfathers lived, where they treated the animal with so much respect that nothing got wasted, and realized that in most butcher shops the butchers actually sell these pieces of meat and don't transform them into dog food or something like that. And the price came as a result of that. Being undesirable pieces of meat but still very delicious and full of nutrition, they sell for very cheap. Now it's $3.74 translated from Polish zlotys to dollars. I'll make at the end of this a calculation to convert it based on prices in the States or in the UK. But still, even there, I have lived in the UK for almost 10 years, which is a very beef-focused country, and you can find beef bones equivalent to this for very cheap in butcher shops. Not in supermarkets, in butcher shops. Now we're going to take all of this meat and we're going to smoke it to preserve it and also to add another dimension of flavor to it. And with a part of this meat, not all of it, a part of this meat, we're going to make food for a whole week for 2 people, and the rest we're going to put away and store for later use. So let's start, because I'm freezing my butt here. All of these meat cuts and bones are going to be used to feed us throughout a whole week, especially dinner dishes. And we'll try to do our best to extract and make the most out of each meat cut and bone. For example, we'll take the backbone and the rib stumps and make a stock or a broth. And then the meat that's going to come from this part, they're going to be put on the side and used in 2 different other dishes. Let's start with the prep for all of these dishes. We'll start this week by preparing a stock or a broth. That's going to be the base for a couple of the dishes in this week. For 10 liters of water, we use 2 racks of bones. So take the bones and cut them into manageable sizes. We cut them in 3, and it's very easy to break them apart just by using a knife, a tension, and just cutting in between of the vertebrae. This way you can split them into smaller pieces that are going to fit in the pot easily. Once the bones are in the pot, top it up with 10 liters of water and put it on the stove on high heat. Once it starts boiling, lower the temperature to minimum and let it boil for 4 hours. After 4 hours, take the bones out and let them cool on the side while the broth continues to simmer. Once the bones reach a manageable temperature, start pulling all of the meat out. For the remainder of the stock, you don't need any meat, but we will need this meat for other dishes, so be thorough and remove all the meat as much as possible. From these 2 bones, we managed to get 1.5 kilo of rib meat. We'll split it in half and freeze 1 batch and leave 1 in the fridge. Then put the bones back into the broth and at low heat let it simmer for the next 18 hours. After the time has passed, we'll have to add some vegetables and spices to the broth. So peel 2 carrots and 1 parsnip, and while they're still whole, add them to the broth. Then prepare 1 teaspoon of allspice, 1 teaspoon of black peppercorns and 2 bay leaves, and add them as well to the broth. Now let them simmer for 2 more hours and then your broth is done. 24 hours have passed. When the broth is done, we're going to let it cool off at room temperature. After that, we'll take the veggies out, we'll use them for a different dish, and strain the whole broth. As part of the prep, we'll have to render the fat that we smoke and split it into lardons and lard. We'll be using this lard to cook throughout the whole week. So take your pieces of smoked fat and dice them. Once you're done, take a cast iron skillet and heat it up. Put all the fat in and keep an eye on it, because we want to render as much fat as possible, but we don't want to burn the lard. Once the fat is rendered, you want to strain the lardons from the lard into it. You keep the lardons as a thing that we can sprinkle on top of dishes, and the fat we're going to let cool off and coagulate, keep it in the fridge, and we're going to use this lard throughout the whole week when we cook. The first recipe that we're going to do is called borscht, and borscht is a general term, like an umbrella term for many types of soups back home. This specific one is going to be made with smoked meat, vegetables, and borscht. The name comes from the sour liquid that we're going to actually add at the end to give it the specific flavor. Now, what is borscht? Borscht is a probiotic sour fermented drink. It's made from fermenting wheat bran with cornmeal, dry active yeast or beer yeast, and water. You can also sour the soup with lemon juice or vinegar. You can pause the video to see the ingredient list before we start making the soup. We'll start by preparing our root vegetables. We'll need 1 carrot, 1 parsnip, a quarter of a celery root, and 1 small onion. Peel the vegetables, dice them, and in a pan, put your oil and let it heat up. After that, put the vegetables inside and saute them for 10 minutes or until they soften up a bit. In the meantime, take 2.5 liters of your stock and start heating it up. We want both the vegetables and the stock to be of similar temperatures before we combine them together, so one doesn't stop the other from cooking. Mix the vegetables with the stock and bring it to a boil. Once it's boiling, drop the temperature and let it simmer for 1 hour. In the meantime, prepare the remaining vegetables. Take 2 large potatoes, peel them and chop them into small pieces, and also take your 2 bell peppers, remove the seeds and dice them. After the first hour has passed, add the potatoes and the peppers to the soup. When your potatoes are fully cooked, add 250 milliliters of borscht or the juice from half a lemon. In the meantime, whisk your egg, and when the soup gets to a boil, get a large spoon and start mixing it in circles like a whirlpool, and then add the egg inside. This is going to create egg noodles basically, and it's going to be beautiful and delicious. Taste your finished product and see if it needs more seasoning. If you're happy with the amount of salt and pepper, then dinner is served. This is so good and it tastes exactly like my childhood. This is just one example of soured soups that I grew up eating, but the combination of ingredients and the way to sour it, as I said, either with the borscht or with lemon juice, or in the summer what we also do to sour it, we take green grapes that are not ripe and we boil them to extract sourness from them, and that's another method of souring soups. But it's such a huge difference from the soups that everybody else is used to. I think you'll fall in love with the taste just like I did many years ago. The second dish is going to be a meat jelly, a dish that has lost favor in the last couple of years, but in my opinion is still such a good and nurturing food that we can still add to our diet this day, because we cook it for so long that we extract so much goodness from both the bones, the meats, and the vegetables inside. You can pause the video here and see the list of ingredients, and let's start. Take the 3 pig's feet and the ham hock and put it in a large pot and top it up with 10 liters of water. Then add 1 tablespoon of black peppercorns and 7 garlic cloves crushed. Then put the pot on the stove on high heat and let it reach a rolling boil. Once that's done, drop the temperature and let it simmer for 4 hours. When these first 4 hours have passed, take the meat out and let it cool off on the side while the broth is still boiling on low heat. Once the meat is cold, we'll separate the bones from the meat and the skin itself. We want to get all of those bones back into the broth and continue boiling, and the meat is going to get divided into the skin and the connective tissue that's going to go into one dish, and the meat that's going to be part of another one. When you finish dividing the meat parts, put them in the fridge and continue boiling the stock for the next 18 hours. Prepare 7 cloves of garlic, and after the 18 hours add them to the pot and continue simmering for the next 2 hours. The meat jelly broth is done, so take it off the heat and let it cool down to room temperature. Then take 1 carrot and 1 parsnip that we took from the rib meat broth, and we're going to dice it and put it in the plates as a base. Then we're going to add some of that skin and connective tissue to create the bottom of the meat jelly, and once the base has reached room temperature, we're going to fill up the plates and then put them in the fridge to set. It will take between 12 and 24 hours for the meat jelly to set properly, so this is a dish that will be enjoyed the next day. And here's the meat jelly after 2 days. It's such a simple and fun dish to make for yourself, for your family, because it's basically a coagulated bone broth or meat and bone broth. You have the added benefit of the skin, the pork skin and the tendons and all of that gooey, crunchy stuff that gives it a nice bite. So let's try it. It's just fun to eat. I don't know, I like jelly in general, so this for me, it just brings me back to childhood. Delicious. The third dish is called rasol or ham hock. Every time we would make the meat jelly, this would be an associated dish with it, because all of that meat that we put aside, both from the ribs and from the ham hock, is gonna come in play now. This specific dish is enjoyed with roasted potatoes, flatbread, and a sauce made from horseradish and garlic. Before we start, pause or take a screenshot of the ingredients and let's get into it. We'll start by preparing the flatbread because this is the most time-consuming aspect of this recipe. In a bowl, start by adding 1 teaspoon of dry active yeast, 1 teaspoon of sugar, and 3/4 of a cup of warm water. Then put them on the side for 5 minutes and let the yeast bloom. Add 2 cups of white all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 1 teaspoon of olive oil, and mix all the ingredients until they come together. Then on a flat, floured surface, knead your dough for 5 minutes or until it becomes elastic. Then put the dough in an oiled bowl, cover it with a tea towel and leave it on the side in a warm place for 45 minutes or until it doubles in size. While the dough is resting, let's start preparing the rest of our meal. For the roasted potatoes, take 400 grams of potatoes, peel them and cut them into smaller pieces. Then put them in a pot and cover them with water and a bit of salt. Boil them and make sure that you cook the potatoes through at this stage, and then when they're done, remove the water, shake the pot until the potatoes get a fluffy outer skin. That's gonna ensure that they're gonna become crispy and nice on the outside while they're soft on the inside. Then preheat your oven at 200 Celsius. Once the oven is at temperature, put the baking tray in with the lard, let it melt and add your potatoes in and shake it a bit so you make sure that they get covered by the lard. This stage is going to take about 15 minutes when the potatoes are going to cook just by themselves. But we'll use this time to prepare our meat, which is very easy because all we have to do is to pull it up a bit to make it all fluffy and season it with salt and pepper to taste. After 15 minutes, check on your potatoes. If they're starting to develop a yellow skin or crust, then it's the time to put the meat in next to them as well. We don't want to put the meat in too early because it's already cooked. We just want to roast it and get that nice caramelized flavor, not to dry it all the way. Continue cooking them for 15 more minutes or until the potatoes are golden brown and fully cooked. The horseradish sauce that goes with this dish is very easy to make and very delicious. Actually, this is a winter dish for us back home, and we always enjoy it with this horseradish sauce because it clears up all your sinuses, especially if you're a bit cold. So in a bowl, mince or press your garlic cloves. Take 1 tablespoon of horseradish sauce, 1 tablespoon of oil, and 1 teaspoon of lemon juice and mix them all together until they're fully incorporated. And it's that easy. That's your horseradish sauce. To finish your flatbread, start by preheating cast iron skillet on high heat and then take the dough and split it into 6 balls or 6 parts. Then while your skillet is heating up, with a rolling pin, roll each individual ball of dough into a flatbread shape and cook it 30 seconds on each side or until it browns up. Now that the flatbread is done, we can take all the other ingredients and have dinner. Woo! And this is why we eat this dish mainly in the dead of winter, because this horseradish sauce really opens up the sinuses from here to Jesus. Wow, but it's delicious. The meat is nice and seasoned and crispy, and you have the rib meat and the ham hock as well, so you got a bit of variety in flavors. Both of them smoked. Then you get the crunch from the crispy potatoes and this flatbread. So simple, so easy, and it adds so much structure to this whole dish. Give it a go. Trust me, you're gonna love it. Our fourth recipe is braised pigtails, and it's a Chinese recipe that takes quite often discarded part of meat, the pigtails, and transform it into something spectacular. Before we start, take a screenshot of the ingredients. So first things first, we're gonna cut the pig's tail into smaller edible chunks. Then once they're cut, put them in a pot and cover them with water. Then put the pot on high heat, and once it starts boiling, cook for 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, remove the water and clean the pig's tails from any scum that may have stuck on them. Prepare your aromatics by peeling and dicing your small onion, your knob of ginger, and 3 garlic cloves. In a pan, put 1 tablespoon of lard and fry these ingredients until they're softened up. Once softened, add the pig's tails, 4-star anise, 1 tablespoon of sugar, 3 tablespoons of soy sauce, and 1/3 cup of beer. Once all the ingredients are in the pot, cover them all with water and bring it to a boil. Once we reach boiling, we're gonna drop the temperature and simmer it for 1 hour. 20 minutes before the main dish is ready, you want to start preparing your rice. I'll give you the easiest, most efficient way of cooking rice. It will never stick, it will never burn. Trust me, this is amazing. You can either use water or stock. I prefer stock because it adds more flavor to the rice. But either way, for each cup of rice, you want to use 2.5 cups of stock or water. In a pot, add the designated liquid and bring it to a boil. Once your liquid is boiling, add the correct amount of rice based on how much liquid you put in and let it boil for 10 minutes on the clock. Once those 10 minutes have expired, stop the heat and let it sit for 10 more minutes without removing the lid. You'll have perfect rice and you will never cook rice in a different way again. Back to the tails now. When they are soft, you want to remove the lid from the pot and let it boil down or reduce to a sauce-like consistency. If it takes too long or if it's still too watery, then you can thicken it up with either cornstarch or flour. Then plate the rice and the pig's tails and enjoy an amazing dinner. The sauce and everything reduced and cooked all the way is so sticky and so delicious, but the stickiness of the lips and the flavor brings you more to the thought of a nice Asian meal. The fifth dinner is a classic. Mashed potatoes with meat and gravy. So take a second and take a screenshot of the ingredients and let's start. This piece of meat that we're going to use now, which is 500 grams, is going to be cooked and then divided for 2 different dishes, today's and a future one. So preheat your oven at 200 degrees Celsius, season your meat with salt and pepper, and put it in for 30 to 45 minutes. We'll know it's done when the inner temperature of the piece of meat has reached 75 degrees Celsius and all the connective tissue is nice and soft. In the meantime, we're going to prepare the mash. So for that, you'll need 400 grams of potatoes that we're going to peel and chop into smaller pieces and cover with water, add a bit of salt and boil until fully cooked. Now that our potatoes are cooked, we're going to leave them in the boiling water on the side. We'll take the fat drippings and we're gonna make our gravy with it. We'll need about 1/8 cup of fat drippings. If we don't have that much, we can substitute it with rendered pork fat. So in a pot, add fat drippings, 1/8 cup of white all-purpose flour. With a whisk, mix everything up until the flour cooks off a bit and incorporates with the fat, and add 2 cups of stock. Use the whisk to remove all flour lumps and then let it thicken up. The gravy is done now, so we can go back to finishing the mashed potatoes. Remove 90% of the water. 90% because we want to keep a bit of that starchy water from the boiling of the potatoes. We'll also add 1/4 cup of stock and 2 tablespoons of lard. I usually mash everything with a whisk, but if you have a variety of potato that is tough, then you can use a potato masher first and then the whisk to give it the fluffiness that we want to achieve here. All of our components are done, so we can plate everything up and start enjoying. I'm not gonna make a big fuss about this. It's one of the most simple, basic and traditional dishes all over the world. It's just mashed potatoes with gravy and a slab of meat. It happens to be meat from the neck part of the pork, which is very delicious, and again a very underused and underestimated culinary delicacy. Nice mashed potatoes, amazing. Enjoy. Day 6 is meat stew day, so take a print screen of these ingredients and let's start. The meat that we're gonna use in this dish is from the meat and mash dish that we've done before. In a pan, melt 1 tablespoon of lard, then peel and dice a medium-sized onion and saute it. While the onion cooks, let's get back to the aromatics. For this, we'll need 1 knob of ginger sliced, 3 garlic cloves diced. Vegetable-wise, peel and dice 1 large potato, 1 carrot and half a bell pepper, 1 tablespoon of smoked paprika and half a teaspoon of marjoram. We'll take all of these ingredients and put them on top of the onion and cook them until they become fragrant. And then take 200 grams of pulled pork and 500 grams of stock and put them all in the pot. Now that all the ingredients are in the pot, cover it with a lid and on medium heat cook for 30 minutes. After this time, check the consistency of your stew. If it's too watery, then you can add 20 grams of all-purpose white flour to thicken it up. And at the same time, prepare half a can of beans of your choice. Put them in the pot, and if you have some leftover flatbread from the previous dish, you can enjoy it with it now. Cooking and eating are very important to me, and to make sure that I eat what's right and what's good, I use a childish approach to it, in the sense that, for example, for a stew, it needs to pass the dip bread test. So I'm gonna dip some homemade bread, and if it's gonna taste good, that's a good soup. So let's do the bread test. And I don't do this with just stews, with soups as well, but this specifically because it's so gooey. I'm a sucker for stews. If it were up to me, I would eat a stew every day, but it's not up to me, so you know, once a week maybe if I'm lucky. So when I get a stew, I fall in love with it. Delicious. I don't need to say that. Try it. It's day 7 and we need some rest. So we left the easiest and the least time consuming recipe for this one. Pause the video for 1 second and check the ingredients, and let's finish this week. The main ingredient for this recipe is going to be the rib meat that we froze on the first day, the one that we pulled from the bones when we made the stock. So take it out and defrost it. Before we start, let's prepare our vegetables. So peel and dice 1 carrot, 1 onion and 1/4 of a celery root, and only dice half a zucchini. In a pot, melt 1 tablespoon of lard, and for 5 minutes, saute your onion, your celery and your carrot. After 5 minutes, add your zucchinis and cook for 5 more minutes until everything gets softened and nice. Then add the meat that we defrosted, 1 can of tomatoes or 3 tablespoons of tomato paste, and 1 liter of the broth. After all your ingredients are in, cover it with the lid and on medium heat cook for 15 more minutes. After this time has passed, season your dish with salt and pepper, and now you're ready to enjoy it. This is the pulled pork meat soup. Let's give it a try. Got a bit of everything in the spoon, so just want to say that rib meat, it's such a delicious and underused meat for cooking, especially not for barbecuing. It's so versatile and so full of flavor compared to other cuts of meat. I think people should use more rib meat in their daily cooking. And if you find a good deal like we did, with the backbone and the ends of the ribs that nobody wants, for pennies, I think you should give this a try because it's so delicious. It has a very specific sweetness to it, and my instinct wants to cover all of that with salt, you know, just like everything has to be savory, but I'm not going to do that because this is something very cozy and very special. Give it a go. It's going to be delicious. Now, at the beginning of the video, I said that we're going to get into the money aspect of it and how much everything costs and compare it to other places. But after asking some people from the UK, from other countries in Europe and from the US to help me, it's obvious that the meat market is very fluctuant and very volatile, especially now. So I wouldn't want to generalize because prices are different even from town to town. I'm not even going to mention country to country. Now, from our experience and the way we shop, we realized that buying from the butcher shop compared to the supermarket can be much more advantageous in the sense that prices can be between 20 and 50% cheaper in the butcher shop. At the same time, when speaking of prime cuts and less desirable cuts, now don't get me wrong, I'm not against prime cuts. I like a piece of loin, I like a piece of ham, but at the same time, there are dishes that you can bulk up with this less desirable parts. You know, any stew can have a piece of meat that's a bit fattier and has some connective tissue. Pulled meat can be done from the jowl or from the neck of the pork. So when it comes to stocks, you can use the bones, and like us, if you have the option, smoke them and add more flavor and more value to them. Prices, even in a supermarket, when you compare prime cut to a lesser cut, there's huge differences. Give that a thought, and maybe next time you shop, think how you can incorporate maybe some pigtails, maybe some ham hocks. Let us know. Was that a good idea? Was that something that just pushed you back into the prime cuts? And also, I would really appreciate if you would share with us the prices in your area, because I tried to get a general price mark from different countries, different parts of the world, but receiving comments from all over the world from you guys would give me a better understanding of how the meat market is right now. The underlying idea here is that we can do so much more with parts of the animal that sometimes just get discarded or don't get the attention that they should, because they're still good parts. They still can feed us. A lot of food gets wasted. A lot of food gets thrown into the landfill and creates more CO2 and methane. So even if this starts the conversation or starts the idea in your head, that's going to be very useful. Also, if the ideas that we share with you in this channel, in these videos, resonate with you, come to our subreddit and let's continue the conversation over there. I'll put the link to the subreddit in the description, and I'm excited to see as many of you over there as possible. And if you want to try these recipes, you'll find the ingredient lists in the link in the description. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and if you find it useful in any way, a like and a subscribe would help us tremendously, and see you next time.